Governor Hochul's nuclear energy plan, can it solve New York's power crisis? Bold moves in energy policy often stir controversy, and Governor Kathy Hochul's directive to the New York Power Authority to construct a new nuclear power plant is no exception. Announced last month, this initiative thrusts the administration into a realm fraught with both promise and peril. Nuclear energy has long been a double-edged sword, hailed as a potential savior for clean, on-demand power, yet marred by significant risks and costs. Historically, nuclear power has seen both triumphs and tragedies. New York, for instance, derives approximately 20% of its electricity from nuclear sources, with nearly half of the state's clean energy coming from 3 operational nuclear plants. Over the years, technological advancements have bolstered safety, but the specter of accidents like the one at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania remains a haunting reminder of the technology's vulnerabilities. Cost overruns in nuclear construction have also been a recurring issue, leaving ratepayers footing the bill for energy they never actually received. Despite these challenges, Hochul's push for nuclear energy is not entirely surprising, given the state's multifaceted energy landscape. New York faces a looming energy crisis, with projections indicating a sharp rise in electricity demand over the next 2 decades. The state's ambitious plans for domestic manufacturing, electric vehicles, and modern heating systems are expected to drive peak demand to 42,840 megawatts by 2045. This figure is notably higher than the 37,292 megawatts forecasted in 2020, before the surge in artificial intelligence and its voracious appetite for power. To put this into perspective, meeting this shortfall would require the equivalent of 7 Empire 1 offshore wind projects. Each of these projects, costing around $5 billion, is designed to power 500,000 homes once completed in 2027. Adding to the urgency, New York is lagging behind on its stringent environmental targets, including a mandate for 70% of energy to come from renewable sources by 2030. Hochul sees nuclear energy as a cornerstone of economic revitalization, particularly in upstate New York, where it could provide a stable and abundant power source to support growth. Nuclear power, along with renewables and other sources, will help lead the economic revitalization of upstate, said Ken Lovett, a spokesman for the governor. We need to ensure the power is there to sustain that growth and the new homes, businesses, and opportunities that come with it. While many business groups, labor unions, and energy stakeholders have praised Hochul's move, the specifics of the project remain vague. Details such as the logistics, anticipated costs, and potential locations are still unknown. Learning from Georgia. 2 primary options are on the table: a large-scale nuclear reactor, similar to those already in operation, or a series of smaller, potentially safer and more manageable reactors. To meet the governor's goal of a single plant capable of generating at least 1 gigawatt of electricity, enough to power 750,000 homes, the state might need to build multiple small reactors. The only recent example of completed nuclear power generation is Georgia Power's 2 new reactors. Launched in 2009, these reactors were initially slated to be operational within a decade. However, they only came online last year after more than $10 billion in cost overruns. As a result, most customers faced a 10% rate increase, and some 190,000 people reportedly lost power due to the high rates in 2024. Despite these setbacks, the reactors now supply energy to about 1 million homes and businesses, supporting 800 permanent jobs. Even with the delays and cost overruns, the Georgia project stands out as a relative success compared to other abandoned large-scale nuclear endeavors. For instance, some South Carolina residents are still paying 5.6% of their monthly energy bills toward a failed nuclear project that now consists of little more than a pile of steel and dirt. Advocates of small-scale reactors view them as a promising new technology with the potential to transform the energy sector. Critics, however, argue that these reactors represent a step backward, ignoring the lessons learned from earlier nuclear projects. The industry started building larger and larger reactors to capitalize on economies of scale, but the costs don't scale linearly, explained M.V. Ramana, a nuclear expert at the University of British Columbia. Building a reactor that generates 5 times as much electricity doesn't necessarily cost 5 times as much as a smaller reactor. Ramana contends that any new small reactor design is simply a more complex way to achieve the same basic principles that led the industry away from small reactors in the first place. NuScale, a company with a design approved by the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission, claims its reactors can be built at a lower cost and in a variety of locations within 3 years. However, a project with Utah Associated Municipal Power Systems was canceled after cost projections nearly doubled. Support for new nuclear energy in New York is bolstered by an annual report from the New York Independent System Operator, which highlights the critical need for reliable energy. Unlike renewables, which are intermittent, nuclear power can provide a steady, clean energy supply 24/7. Solar and wind are important, but they are not always available when demand peaks, said Gavin Donahue, president and CEO of Independent Power Producers of New York. New York needs firm, zero-emitting, dispatchable resources that can operate at any time, day or night, rain or shine. For Donahue, Hochul's announcement signals a broader acknowledgement from the administration that a diverse mix of non-emitting energy sources is essential to achieving the state's clean energy goals. However, State Senator Kevin S. Parker, chair of the Senate Committee on Energy and Telecommunications, prefers a focus on renewables like offshore wind, geothermal, and microhydro to meet reliability demands. Nuclear is clean, but it's not sustainable or renewable. Certainly not what I would have done, Parker said. Nuclear relies on uranium, a finite resource unlike solar or wind. Parker also suggested that restarting the shuttered Indian Point nuclear facility would have been a better choice. Indian Point, which was closed in 2021 due to various concerns, including its proximity to New York City, once provided about 25% of the city's energy. Reactivating the site, which is already unusable for the next 1,000 years, could avoid creating a new unusable location. Former State Public Service Commissioner John Howard criticized the idea of an upstate nuclear plant, noting that New York City is more dependent on aging fossil fuel resources than the upstate region. If you build it upstate, it does bupkis for New York City and Long Island, Howard said. New York City relies on 2 power plants that are nearly as old as I am, and I'm old. Fossil fuel plants currently supply over 3/4 of downstate New York's energy, while upstate sources are 89% clean, with over 40% coming from nuclear. Building a new reactor upstate wouldn't necessarily improve New York City's energy renewability without significant transmission upgrades. Howard also questioned the Power Authority's current capability to manage a nuclear construction project or operate a nuclear plant. It's in our DNA to do big things, said Power Authority President and CEO Justin Driscoll. We won't build and operate a new plant alone. We envision a public-private partnership, and this will not be a Power Authority-only project. The Power Authority, which operates 17 power-generating facilities and over 1,500 circuit miles of transmission lines, is poised to tackle this challenge. However, some renewable energy advocates remain skeptical of the governor's decision to pursue nuclear energy. It is puzzling to rely on an energy source known for massive delays and cost overruns, which have historically impacted utility rates, said Michael Paulson, co-chair of the Public Power New York Coalition. Developing nuclear isn't a quick way to transition off fossil fuels, as most projects take years to complete. While developing nuclear energy has been challenging, Hochul's timing may be advantageous. The federal regulatory environment has become more favorable, with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission relaxing some rules under the Trump administration. Earlier this month, TerraPower, a nuclear innovation company founded by Bill Gates, praised the Commission's decision to shorten the permitting process from 26 months to 19 months. President Trump's executive orders support the streamlining of regulatory reviews to safely deploy advanced nuclear energy in the United States, the company stated in a release. TerraPower is developing an advanced reactor in Wyoming, which Gates believes could be replicated nationwide. Welcoming communities. Hochul has emphasized that the new plant will only be built in areas with community support. Only receptive, welcoming communities will be considered, she recently stated. New York's nuclear revival, abundance versus environmental challenges. #### the future of atomic energy and its challenges. On a sweltering Monday morning last June, Governor Kathy Hochul stood before the Niagara Hydroelectric Station in upstate New York, discussing the future. Once a thriving industrial hub for giants like General Electric, IBM, and Kodak, this manufacturing region began to decline in the 1970s as these companies sought cheaper labor overseas. Hardworking families across upstate, Hochul remarked, were left wondering, what is our future? Now, Governor Hochul aims to provide that future for upstate New York through a process of reindustrialization, focusing on advanced manufacturing for products such as semiconductors. However, she emphasized that these manufacturing facilities don't run on dreams, they need to be powered, they need a lot of electricity. This is particularly relevant as new manufacturing initiatives, spurred by policies from the Biden administration, are driving up electricity demand nationwide. To power New York's future, we need three essential elements: reliability, affordability, and sustainability, Hochul stated. She proposed a solution that many blue state liberals, including herself, had largely abandoned: nuclear energy. New York is set to return to atomic power, 37 years after its last nuclear unit was constructed and 4 years after her predecessor closed one of the state's 4 nuclear plants. This marks a significant shift in New York's energy policy. By opting for nuclear energy, Hochul aims to demonstrate to the nation that blue states like New York can dream big and build big because we believe in the philosophy of abundance. The influential book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson has evidently made a strong impression on her. While the concept of abundance highlights the importance of state capacity for liberals, Hochul's announcement serves as a reminder to the authors and supporters of the book about the enduring potential of New Deal-style public sector development. Instead of merely clearing regulatory hurdles and hoping that a private energy company will invest, Hochul is instructing the State Power Authority to actively develop and construct a nuclear plant in upstate New York. The New York Power Authority, NYPA, a public utility established in 1931 by Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt to harness the state's rivers, will now focus on harnessing atomic energy. In this endeavor, NYPA will act as the state's special forces, as a Hochul spokesperson described it. This historic initiative will lay the groundwork for the next generation of prosperity, just as this facility did, Hochul said, referring to the massive Niagara Power project behind her, which was built and is still operated by NYPA. It can also demonstrate what government is meant to do: build infrastructure that supports economic growth and security. The return to nuclear energy has garnered overwhelming support from New York's industrial unions. The state AFL-CIO, Building Trades, Laborers Union, Utility Workers Union of America, UWUA, and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, all expressed their approval in the official press release. They were joined by manufacturing associations, chambers of commerce, and various business groups, along with some nonprofit organizations that advocate for nuclear power, such as the Clean Air Task Force. However, not everyone is on board. Numerous environmental groups in the state vehemently oppose nuclear energy, despite its lack of greenhouse gas emissions. For instance, Food and Water Watch criticized the announcement as a reckless distraction, while the Alliance for a Green Economy labeled it a bill-raising boondoggle that still results in dangerous toxic waste. Last year, a letter urging the state to refrain from considering new nuclear energy was signed by 153 organizations. Interestingly, the official press release did not mention Public Power New York, the environmental coalition that successfully campaigned 2 years ago to authorize NYPA to build public renewables. This coalition, largely driven by the New York City chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, which includes DSA member, State Assembly member, and now Democratic nominee for New York City Mayor, Zohran Mamdani, is more directly influenced by environmental justice nonprofits. In their own statement, they dismissed Hochul's announcement as unserious, criticizing NYPA's progress on renewable projects and demanding their own specific targets. Kathy Hochul's vision, however, paints a different picture of the future. While Klein and Thompson envision homes adorned with abundant rooftop solar panels, she sees nuclear-powered industrial manufacturing and long-term careers for the working class, all spearheaded by a proactive public institution. This represents a transformative shift in liberal politics that should be welcomed rather than dismissed. Shifting energy priorities in New York. Amid the electric hum of Niagara's transformers, Hochul articulated simply, harnessing the power of the atom is the best way to generate steady zero-emission electricity. The weight of this statement from New York's governor cannot be overstated. It has been 50 years since New York last initiated the construction of nuclear plants in the 1960s and 1970s, during a time when the state had an atomic and space development authority. Various leaders, including Governor Nelson Rockefeller, sought to ensure that the state benefited from the emerging technology of nuclear fission, particularly given New York's lack of abundant fossil fuels. Currently, the 3 remaining plants in the state's nuclear fleet are all located upstate. A 4th plant, Indian Point, was shut down in 2021 by Governor Andrew Cuomo following a prolonged legal battle led by elite environmental groups, including one whose legal division was headed by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the current U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services and Cuomo's former brother-in-law. The closure eliminated a quarter of New York City's power supply, increased air pollution throughout the city, heightened reliance on natural gas and its fluctuating prices, devastated the local economy, and resulted in the loss of hundreds of union jobs. Although the state has not expressed interest in new nuclear energy, a policy established in 2016 acknowledged the significance of the existing upstate nuclear fleet by introducing a new subsidy funded through utility bills, known as zero-emissions credits. Due to his campaign to close Indian Point, Governor Cuomo only permitted the upstate plants to receive this subsidy. The rationale was that the state's deregulated electricity market rendered these plants unprofitable and at risk of closure without the subsidy. Last year, the 3 upstate plants generated nearly double the amount of clean energy compared to all of the state's wind turbines and solar panels combined. If Indian Point were still operational, the total output from the fleet would have exceeded that of all wind and solar energy in New York and New England combined. Unlike renewable sources, the nuclear fleet provides power consistently, regardless of weather conditions or season, and does not require extensive upgrades to transmission and distribution systems that quietly increase utility costs. The 3 plants are situated at only 2 different sites, highlighting that despite the nuclear fleet's enduring strength, New York has spent the last 2 decades incentivizing new renewable energy sources instead. The state has also favored competitive developers over its own regulated utilities when determining investment priorities. However, policy has not been entirely hands-off. Albany has been heavily involved in creating complex competitive processes and financial instruments to make renewable investments more appealing. Since 2004, the state has mandated that a specific percentage of electricity sold by its utilities must come from renewable sources such as solar, wind, and small hydroelectric generators. This percentage target has steadily increased with new legislation every few years, rising from 25% to 30%, then to 50%, and finally to 70%. Throughout this process, these targets have been implemented through the establishment of renewable energy certificates that are generated alongside the electricity and traded as a separate commodity, serving as an additional subsidy for project developers. The New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, manages these processes, collecting these subsidies from utility bills to distribute back to developers. NYSERDA itself is a clear indication of the shift in state priorities. It was originally the Atomic and Space Development Authority until 1975. The last increase in renewable targets was a crucial component of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act (CLCPA), signed by Governor Cuomo in 2019, marking a significant victory for the state's environmental groups. This law established various mandates for emissions reductions and deadlines for designing programs to achieve them, including specific requirements for distributed solar, i.e., small-scale solar on rooftops and within local utility systems, rather than on the larger grid, battery storage, and offshore wind. In addition to its 70% renewable target, the CLSPA also set a separate goal of achieving 100% zero-emissions electricity by 2040, a decade later. This latter target reflects the actual aim of creating a decarbonized electricity system, a goal that can be accomplished through a broader range of technologies beyond just renewables, including nuclear energy. However, the state has yet to introduce any specific subsidies or processes to incentivize such technologies, a gap that labor unions and competitive power developers highlighted in 2021, and only proposed concrete definitions for the goal last December. The entity responsible for managing New York's electrical grid and power markets concurs. The New York Independent System Operator, NYSO, a private, not-for-profit organization, has spent recent years sounding the alarm about the necessity for dispatchable emissions-free resources, DEFRs. These technologies must be integrated into the grid to meet the 2040 target of 100% zero-emissions electricity. They are also essential for maintaining reliable electricity service alongside other prioritized resources. As more wind, solar, and storage plants are added to the grid, NYSO stated in a 2022 report, DEFRs must be added to the system, or fossil generation retained, to satisfy electricity demand when intermittent generation is unavailable. In essence, while renewables undoubtedly play a role in decarbonizing New York's electricity generation, an exclusive focus on renewables, a common stance among environmental groups and the left, is insufficient. This is precisely why the state requires nuclear energy. Every forecast of New York's clean energy future has acknowledged the necessity of nuclear energy to meet demand and ensure grid reliability, Hochul's spokesperson Paul DeMichele informed me. The governor's directive to NYPA guarantees that New York will be prepared to power the grid of the future. #NYPA's role in shaping the future. Hochul's choice of Niagara as the site for her nuclear announcement was not merely a nod to significant public power. The full name of the hydroelectric station is the Robert Moses Niagara Power Plant. The renowned master builder and power broker oversaw this monumental project as NYPA's chairman in the 1950s and early 1960s. Having successfully constructed two massive hydroelectric projects, NYPA recognized the need to venture into nuclear development alongside the state's private utilities. As Moses articulated in the authority's 1960 annual report, the control of atomic energy will, before long, be the greatest domestic policy question before the American people, because those who control fission and fusion will be the masters of population growth and location, industry, trade, commerce, and life itself. This is too great a control to be exercised otherwise than on the theory that it is effected with a major public purpose, not to be left exclusively to private profit enterprise. However, a state committee convened by Governor Nelson Rockefeller to plan for nuclear development in New York recommended that NYPA focus on hydroelectric power instead, suggesting that the state's private utilities should lead New York into the atomic age. Any legislation allowing NYPA to participate in development would require further study, according to the committee's report. Moses countered the committee's do-nothing recommendations, which he deemed as counseling procrastination and delay, with another report titled Atomic Power. Utilities were only considering small, demonstration nuclear projects, and due to their profit motives and higher financing costs, their plants would take too long to build and be too expensive. If NYPA did not promptly initiate a large nuclear plant focused solely on producing economical power, the state would begin losing industrial production to other states that had abundant fossil fuels to exploit. After pressure from Democrats like Senator Robert Kennedy, who advocated for the New Deal approach to public power as a yardstick, a public sector alternative to exert downward pressure on prices from private utilities, Governor Rockefeller eventually signed a law in 1968 allowing NYPA to construct its own nuclear plants alongside private utilities. Within 7 months, NYPA submitted its application to build its first plant, the James A. Fitzpatrick Nuclear Power Plant, named after Moses's successor, to the Federal Atomic Energy Commission. And construction commenced in 1970 once that approval was granted. NYPA reduced the plant's cost by taking over core components that were under contract with a private utility and by situating it next to that utility's recently completed plant. Due to this association, Chairman James Fitzpatrick had to assure the public during construction that, once operational, it would be owned and operated solely by NYPA. The plant began operations in 1975 and continues to function today. Half a century later, it is one of 3 in New York. However, NYPA's original nuclear plant is no longer under its ownership or operation. In 2000, the authority divested its nuclear division, not only Fitzpatrick, but also half of the Indian Point nuclear plant that NYPA had taken over during construction, along with approximately half of the authority's workforce. As part of New York's electricity deregulation, all utilities, including NYPA, sold their nuclear plants to merchant generation companies that operated them to produce power as a wholesale commodity, rather than as part of electricity service provided in the public interest. New York State possesses a public power tool in NYPA that other states lack. This sets Governor Hochul apart from other predominantly Republican governors like Phil Scott of Vermont, Ron DeSantis of Florida, J.B. Pritzker of Illinois, and Mike Braun of Indiana, all of whom have expressed interest in new nuclear development in their states, though none as vocally as Hochul. The governor's approach is not rooted in an ideological preference for public power, nor is it about using public power as a yardstick. Instead, it represents a pragmatic use of state capacity to initiate a new pipeline of nuclear development in the private sector, establishing a supply chain, identifying industrial partners, and so forth. A pipeline that was first envisioned at NYSERDA's Future Energy Economy Summit last September. As Hochul's spokesperson Dee Michelle explained to me, NYPA is playing the role of special forces in the state's energy portfolio, moving ahead to provide invaluable lessons learned while acting as a first mover in new nuclear power. Why is Governor Hochul utilizing this tool now to construct new nuclear facilities? In her announcement, Hochul referenced 2 previous instances when NYPA stepped up to serve the state through significant power projects in the 1970s and earlier. Another instance, which she did not mention, was NYPA's rapid deployment in 2000 of a fleet of gas-powered peaker plants around New York City, installed on an emergency basis to prevent a projected power shortfall the following summer. A state comptroller report criticized the utility for interfering in the newly restructured electricity market with not-for-profit generators. These plants remain the cleanest power facilities in New York City. When it comes to NYPA stepping in to build, however, many observers of state energy politics have a more recent example in mind: the successful campaign to build public renewables. #### the vision of building public renewables. In 2019, NYCDSA led the Public Power New York Coalition, along with environmental nonprofits like the Alliance for a Green Economy, in a campaign to revitalize NYPA. The core idea behind the Build Public Renewables Act, BPRA, was unmistakably rooted in state capacity. If the private sector is not rapidly constructing renewables to meet CLSPA goals, then the state should intervene, utilizing NYPA to build them itself, at lower costs to ratepayers due to the absence of profits for shareholders. Is this not precisely what abundance, as envisioned by Klein and Thompson, should resemble? Has the environmental left already achieved what liberals aspire to, albeit with a more New Deal-style focus on public development and a coalition that includes labor? The answer is not as straightforward as some on the left might wish to believe. The fundamental concept of BPRA indeed aligns with the principles of the Abundance Program. However, it is commonly misunderstood that BPRA did not become law. Instead, the Hochul administration, likely with assistance from NYPA, revised it as part of the governor's 2024 budget law, retaining most of the key ideas while eliminating some counterproductive elements. This revision not only preserved BPRA's expansion of state capacity into the highly competitive realm of renewables, but also safeguarded NYPA from a reduction of state capacity that the environmental left sought. Notably, the revision granted new authority to sell power from renewable projects into the state's wholesale markets, which is crucial for the financial viability of public renewables. Beyond the positive arguments for abundance, the BPRA campaign also exemplifies many aspects of the book's critique of progressivism gone awry, largely due to its steadfast alliance with environmental nonprofits. First, it was environmental nonprofits, many of which were behind the CLSPA climate law, that fixated exclusively on renewable energy. Even though all rational planning for decarbonization recognizes it as insufficient on its own to meet demand. Until the Hochul administration's intervention, BPRA sought to restrict NYPA to owning and operating only renewables, thereby preventing new nuclear development and also relegating its fossil-fueled fleet to privatization or legal complications once 2031 arrived. Second, while BPRA aimed to expand NYPA's capabilities, it also introduced various new procedures to limit the authority's actions. A new democratization plan would require NYPA to collaborate with and provide funding to private nonprofits focused on distributed renewable energy to ensure that the expansion of renewable projects across the state aligns with the principles of energy democracy and transparency. A new Just Transition plan would outline how NYPA's employees involved in non-renewable energy projects would be supported as BPRA phased those projects out. Additionally, a new 10-year climate resiliency plan would have been mandated, with annual updates and a stakeholder process, to demonstrate how NYPA would be developing renewables in compliance with the CLSPA. This would have further complicated the already intricate technical processes of electric reliability planning. Even more concerning, nonprofits that the state considers regional clean energy hubs, including at least one environmental nonprofit in the PPNY coalition, would have final approval, along with the NYSO grid operator, on retaining any fossil-fueled NYPA generators for reliability reasons after the imposed deadline. Who needs a public authority when there's an army of foundation-funded nonprofits? A year and a half after the passage of BPRA, NYPA announced commendable progress by establishing a pipeline of numerous renewable projects across New York. Given the technical and permitting requirements, each project can take well over a year to complete. This is a pure lesson in the scalability of state capacity, Paul Williams of the Center for Public Enterprise remarked. NYPA, which already has a large energy portfolio, was able to mobilize its teams of engineers and underwriters to develop a substantial new pipeline for renewables. However, this has not deterred the PPN.